Excellent. Michelle, do you want to take it away? We're up and running and recording.
All right. So welcome, everyone. I'll let you take about a couple minutes to grab a coffee. We'll get settled in and we'll start in about a minute. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome folks to the StrikeGraph webinar. This is part of our StrikeGraph compliance series, and each month we'll have an expert that we'll invite to participate in the webinar. And I'm very excited to kick off this first compliance series webinar with an auditor, an expert in SOC 2 compliance, and a partner in the SOC 2 journey.
Thank you, Michelle.
Today, we're going to walk through just the ins and outs of a SOC 2, when to begin the process, some pitfalls, how to ensure success, and then go through a couple other tips and tricks from both an auditor perspective and from StrikeGraph's perspective as a trusted advisor. And my name's Michelle Strickler. I am a senior content compliance strategist at StrikeGraph. And I've got a few years consulting. So I'm excited to see that we now have tools that help kind of make my job easier, take away that consulting, and automate it. And I'm based in Seattle, Washington, and I kind of consider myself a compliance geek. So really enjoy what I do, which is guiding companies through the SOC 2 journey. I have also on this webinar, Nick Norton from Geels Norton. He is an auditor, and I met Nick at a mutual client. I was actually brought onto the client to kind of help prep the SOC 2 journey. And I sat in on a few interviews that with different auditors as they were selecting the auditors. And what struck me immediately when Nick brought his firm to the table was that he really took the approach of being a partner in the SOC 2 journey. And he didn't speak any BS and salesy talk, so that was kind of nice. And he really spoke to that partnership in being an auditor. So Nick, I'd like to let you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you to StrikeGraph for the opportunity to join this morning. As Michelle referenced, partner at Geels Norton. After about over a decade of leadership positions at multiple top-tier regional national CPA firms, my partner Brian and I had this burning desire that there had to be a better way. And what we meant by that is a better way to, from a customer service perspective, from a turning around reports perspective, really a hand-holding guidance partnership perspective, that we knew it's what our clients wanted and needed for success. And so we launched Geels Norton, and really to provide that high touch, high quality, high value boutique approach. And SOC 2 is our bread and butter. We specialize in SOC 2 for high growth technology and SaaS companies. And we're also preferred Microsoft SSPA assessors. And so we have that data privacy security combo in the back pocket as well. So thank you for inviting us to be here today. Super excited to talk through these topics, and hopefully it's of value to our guests.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. As we go through the deck, feel free to leave questions in the chat, and we'll get to those. And we're approaching this as more like a chat. So as questions come in and they fit, we'll answer those, or we'll stop midway and answer a few questions, and absolutely have questions at the end. So our first question is, who would an organization should own the SOC 2 journey to maximize success? One thing that I've found is when it's one owner, not a panel of owners, and that owner is usually at a very high level, that's more successful. Usually it's head of operations, maybe a slight IT bent, could be the CEO, could be the COO. Nick, what have you seen?
Spot on, Michelle. Kind of two things. The key piece for leading and maximizing the SOC 2 success is having a change agent who is a key leadership role in the company to help lead the SOC 2 initiative in the process. Like any key organizational initiative in change, we need that champion. And we need it from someone who is of high visibility and that folks are going to follow. From a seed or Series A company, that could be the CEO, it could be the CTO, it could be the COO. They're the ones who are leadership and still intimately involved from a management perspective. As the company scales, that role is going to evolve. And so slowly the company is going to get someone, for example, a chief information security officer or a VP of security or a compliance person to help manage the ongoing operations of compliance in SOC 2. Still though, even in those scenarios, we find that even if we're working directly with a VP of compliance, for example, if they don't have the full support of the higher ups and of their leadership, it's still not going to be a success. So having that high visibility leadership as the initiative leader is key to maximizing the journey.
Thanks, Nick. Our next question is, when should an organization begin the process and who should they consult? Now, this is interesting. We always say sooner is better, but the reality is that folks generally don't start the journey until they get that key customer who demands that they have the SOC 2. Know that oftentimes it is reactive, but if you have runway, the sooner you hop on a compliance bandwagon, the better. And we also find that it's helpful to involve auditors early. In a way, auditors are the customer for the SOC 2. You have to impress them. And then it switches, the dynamic switches, and the SOC 2 can be used to bring in more sales, actually. Nick, do you have?
Yeah, to your point, there's really two scenarios of clientele that we work with. One are those clients that know in a year or in a year and a half, a key part of their growth strategy is going to be obtaining a SOC 2 report. And so we'll start working with them way ahead of time so they understand, here's the expectations. We can take them through a readiness process or essentially a mock exam so that they know here are all of our gaps based on the SOC 2 criteria. Here's who we could work for someone like you, Michelle, for remediation of those gaps. Then they have some time to think through it. What's the investment going to be, both monetarily and time-wise, and actually operationalize all of those enhancements. On the other end of the spectrum, it's the not quite being as prepared, but unexpectedly having opportunities to work with new customers, and those new customers are asking our clients, we need a SOC 2 report from you ASAP to help demonstrate your commitment to good and sound security practices. And so then it is a mad dash to obtain SOC 2 immediately. And a lot of times it's going to be be a little less organized of a process on the client's end because it is so rushed. You don't have the time to really think through what are those practices, processes, procedures that aren't going to just check off that SOC 2 box, but are actually going to help mature and grow the company long term in really operationalizing those practices sooner so that we can test them out, play them out, etc. So when it comes time for SOC 2, they're really humming and they're actually providing value beyond just that compliance piece.
Yeah, and Nick, you mentioned the mad dash. So in smaller companies, what I've seen is it becomes all hands on deck. All of a sudden, the product takes a back seat. All hands are on deck to meet these compliance requirements.
Yeah, I
So
think
starting early definitely helps.
that's a good point, Michelle. And one thing I think is often overlooked, and this kind of goes back to who should be involved in the process as well. SOC 2 on the outside is often looked at as a pure IT and security process.
Mhm.
That is far from the truth. I would say about 50% of the process is IT, security, infrastructure related. The other piece is operational. It's organizational governance, it's oversight, it's strategy, it's risk assessment, it's our people operations. So it's the entire, the SOC 2 process covers the entire organization and system that supports delivery of the product. So of that SaaS product, for example.
Mhm. Great. Our next question, what are the 3 biggest pitfalls you've seen companies fail to avoid? I know we've talked about that agent of change. Is there anything else, Nick, that you wanted to throw in?
I would say that the biggest pitfall that we run into is mindset. If you're going to approach SOC 2 or any compliance initiative, heck, any organizational initiative with a let's just check off the box mindset, then you're not going to set you up for success long term, nor short term. The SOC 2 process or any compliance process is going to require significant change, and so significant buy-in there. And so we're going to really want to make sure that as we're doing that, we're committed to improving our business and investing in our business so that we're using the SOC 2 initiative really as a way to mature our company, enhance our company, improve those processes, understand what are our organizational goals, what are our strategies, and any enhancements that we're making from the process side, let's align those with our strategy. And that's going to be the key piece, is really committing to a process beyond compliance in really the organizational maturity and growth.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the pitfalls I've seen as I've coached companies through it is kind of a buckshot approach. Say, what policies do I need? And then they start applying policies. And then all of a sudden, they've maybe gone down a path where they've created a document that they didn't really need. It doesn't really fit them. I think a risk-based approach, understanding what really is important, what you're trying to achieve, that really aligns the controls, right sizes the controls, and just a buckshot haphazard implementation of controls just because you think they're the right thing to do. That kind of speaks to that check the box. Oh yeah, we're slapping this control on to check a box, when it really becomes busy work. It's not really addressing a risk or a core concern of the organization. One thing we have on this slide is about a running start, type 2. What this means is going straight into the type 2. Type 1 is usually what folks will get first. Type 1 is a point in time audit where the auditor is really looking at the design of controls. Type 2 is over a stretch of time where the auditor is looking at samples of controls. And can you talk about the pitfall of going straight to a running start type 2, Nick?
Happy to, and I'll preface it that we've had a handful of clients over the years that have felt that they were ready for a type 2 right from the start. And so, respect the clients, which is, so we'll start with the type 2. It's never been a success. No. So there's always opportunities for improvement. There's always gaps that we're finding as auditors that the type one, it's really the full approach of the readiness, then the type one, then the type two exam in that cadence really helps set up for success. For the readiness is that the gap assessment, the mock exam. Then you have a remediation time to actually any of those gaps, implement controls to remediate. And then you hit the type one exam, which to your point, is the point in time. We'll be testing controls. The design of those controls up to that point gives us a chance to actually implement those. And the type two gives a chance to actually operate those controls over a period of time. In that, the cadence of taking that time is imperative, A, to SOC 2 success, but B, to operational success with all of these controls that you are implementing.
Great point. I think if a entity wanted to jump straight into a type 2, the only time I'd recommend that is if the group of folks who are dealing with it have been through the process before. They can dedicate sprint time to it, and they're going to know that there may be some quick remediation fixes that they're going to need to do. That's the only time it would be successful. But to your point, Nick, I've never seen it be 100% successful.
What's also really helpful for clients is when we're able to collaborate with someone like you, like a consultant on this working on behalf of our clients through that readiness process. It helps everyone understand what is the SOC 2 process, what are our expectations, what are the client services, systems, operations. And so when it comes time for the actual type 1 exam, the audit, everyone's familiar with each other. So the team knows each other, they know communication styles, they know expectations, they know what's going to be the evidence that we're going to be expected to provide. So it minimizes surprises. Rushing the process ends up with a lot of surprises. I want to touch upon a point you made too about the policies in policy development. I think too often organizations see that step one, let's get all of these policies in place. And a lot of times it's grabbing templates, grabbing other things that we know that these sound really good. Let's do the policies and we're good to go. We immediately touch upon all of our new clients with policy and procedure is fantastic, but unless you've actually operationalized those policies and procedures and you're actually practicing those day in, day out, your policies are worthless. It's a written intention and not an actual operationalized process. When we're auditing, yes, we think it's fantastic that you have policies to drive expectations, but we're going to be auditing about whether your operations align with those policies. And we often find that, especially during the initial audits, the policies don't necessarily align directly with the operations. And so we always urge clients to review those policies ahead of time, make sure that they're realistic for you. Do they support your strategy? Do you actually want to be doing that? I had a client last week that within their policy, they stated that they're going to be doing disaster recovery testing every quarter. And we said, are you really going to do that every quarter, or is more of an annual cadence realistic? And they said, yeah, that should really be annual. Let's update our policy because that's what we're going to actually be doing. So it's make sure that those policies and the operations align for long-term success.
Yeah, great point, Nick. And this also leads into the next question. How do companies set themselves up for success on this journey? And because I've worked with Nick in the past, I know that this is a true statement. Auditors do not like to see companies fail. They really want to be, a good auditor will be a great partner along the way, point out where there may be, where they might see a hiccup. And also a great auditor has a fabulous way of dropping a hint without telling you exactly what to do. So for example, the hint may be, you may want to consider whatever. It's that may want to consider is just, that's the advice right there. Whatever follows that phrase. And we have talked about mindset and setting a strong culture with the policy and procedure. I tend to coach my clients, and it's the straight graph approach, to really take a look at what the risks are, rather than say, oh, every company is going to have these same 50 controls. Well, no, not necessarily. So for example, in our own SOC 2 strike graph, we thought, oh, we're going to need an employee handbook. We're not quite there yet. But the better thing to show may be an acceptable use policy or code of conduct. And we can grow into a wider employee handbook as we mature and grow. So that risk-based approach will tell you, yeah, we definitely need an acceptable use policy to address risks of misuse, but it doesn't mean we need an employee handbook to capture it. Any other setup for success tips here, Nick?
No, you struck a chord there, Michelle. I know at Geels Norton, our motto is value beyond compliance, and you hit the nail on the head, where really understanding your organizational needs here, what fits your company the best. A common misconception of SOC 2, as you and I have discussed in the past, is that SOC 2 is a control framework. It's not a control framework. It's what we call a management framework.
Mm-hmm.
So SOC 2 actually consists of a series of criteria or objectives that companies are required to be able to fulfill or to hit. How they fulfill those criteria or those objectives depends on the company. And so we really like to help companies understand, here's the objective. What are the controls that are applicable to us right now and as we grow to help meet that? And in Strike Graph's scenario, maybe an employee handbook's very important as you grow and scale and have 50 or 100 employees. In the Strike Graph scenario, the key pieces are the code of conduct and the acceptable use, and communicating those core expectations first. And so going into the process with that understanding and with that mindset, it provides a little bit more flexibility for the SOC 2 process. It's really going to help you succeed too, not only from the SOC 2 standpoint, but again, from helping your company mature and operationalize in a successful way.
Fantastic. Thanks. We can pause for questions now. If anybody has any questions, if we struck a chord with anybody, would like us to go down a different path, speak to something in detail, feel free to put that in the chat. While we wait for some questions, we wanted to just pop in a little bit of what do we see changing in the remote world. So what kind of changes do the auditors see? What kind of changes in control sets do folks like Strike Graph see? And one thing that comes up in the remote world is making sure your teams are getting into your network appropriately. One of the big new glossy words out there is a zero trust landscape. And with all VPN, Wi-Fi, home networks, etc., zero trust may be something to consider. Nick, did you have any insights here from an auditor perspective?
Yeah, really from an auditor and just organizational strategy standpoint, the more remote workforce ready we are is going to mean the more and more third-party vendors that we're using. And usually those third-party vendors are they're cloud-based technology companies. So that's driving two things. One, it's driving those companies to undergo SOC 2. And the reason for that is because when we are outsourcing any of our business operations or functions to third-party tools, Zoom, for example, then we have to keep in mind that we can outsource business functions. We cannot outsource risk. So when we are selecting vendors to use as part of our tech stack or technology ecosystem, we need to fully understand what kind of data is going to be processed, stored, transmitted through that vendor, how are we going to assess the risk of that vendor? Is it to our acceptable level? And really understanding what's the data flow of using those vendors. And that's going to have an impact on the SOC 2 exam as well, from two perspectives. One perspective, vendor management is a key part of SOC 2, and understanding your vendors and understanding their risk and assessing those risks. The other piece is similar to your zero trust reference. The user access or logical controls we'll be looking at now aren't just for getting into your company's network of systems. You're also managing access to those third-party vendors. And so whether that be multi-factor authentication being enforced there, using single sign-on technology to better manage access to those third-party vendors, they're all considerations that companies must take from a operational and compliance standpoint, and they're considerations that we take when designing our audit.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Next question. If a client asks you're the company, to get a SOC 2 report, what are the first three things a leader should do? So this comes from, you as the customer perspective. I like to say, well, what's driving the request? So often, I don't know how many times I've seen this, the client or the customer of your product says, oh, you need a SOC 2 report, but they don't actually know what they're asking for. Sometimes I've seen in contracts even a SOC 1 when they really meant SOC 2. Sometimes they'll say, we need a SOC 2 type 2, and that's fine, but it's worth going back to your purchasing partner and asking, do you really mean a type 2? May we start with a type 1? Maybe if you're a small organization, pre-public, you say, we really can commit to a type 1, and we can commit to a type 2 6, 9, 12 months later. So it's worth having that conversation with the buyer to just really set yourself up for success, and then also show that you know what you're talking about. Going straight to a type 2 is a lot of work. So there's no harm in asking, hey, can we evolve into a type 2 as our partnership matures? Nick, anything that you've seen as that leaders should think about?
Yeah, one thing that we always, if we're working with a brand new client and they come to us and say, hey, we need a SOC 2, the first thing we'll ask is why. And when our prospective client says, because one of our prospective clients are asking us, we say, well, what do they want? What's the intention here? And too often what happens is, to your reference, especially at large organizations, part of their general vendor management program or new vendor onboarding program is request a SOC 2. And oftentimes those who are running those programs may not understand the services that our customers are actually providing in the relevancy of SOC 2, nor do they dictate the scope of expectation of those SOC 2. And what I mean by that is, as our audience may be familiar with, SOC 2 can cover up to 5 trust service categories. Security, which is the common criteria, the required scope. We can also add availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy categories. And we always like to have our clients have a clear understanding of what are expectations of their customers. Is it fine to just do the security category? We often see security, availability, and confidentiality being what I call the big three, the common three. If personal data is a key part of what our clients are processing, privacy is often in there. And Michelle, for our shared client, they do processing integrity because they do some claims processing. And the thought process behind our approach to our exams and helping our clients make sure that we're doing the right approach for what's in their scope is understanding the intent and really what we're trying to communicate to the customers who are end users.
Fantastic. How about, Where does the SOC 2 fit within security compliance? Any view on that, Nick?
Yes, had it in Chuck, because we had a great conversation with some fellow industry leaders in this last week, and there was a conversation of, does compliance come first or does culture come first? And what we really harped on in our discussion was tone at the top drives everything. And then strategy from tone at the top is going to develop that culture, and that's going to drive your SOC 2 and compliance pieces. And so kind of the cadence here is, one, we need a culture and tone at the top that supports general security best practices. Then I liked your reference earlier, the risk-based approach to IT security. Let's understand what are our risks, and let's actually address those risks through putting in controls that mitigate those risks to a level that we're comfortable with. Oftentimes, when our clients pre-SOC 2 have already thought through, here are all of our InfoSec risks, here are all of our organizational risks, here are all the controls that we've put in place to address and mitigate those. When it comes time for SOC 2, they are 95% there, because they've already gone through best business practices, what works well for us. They've operationalized those controls. And so SOC 2 almost fits nicely on top of those, the operationalized information security system they've already put in place. So I guess to reiterate there, first, culture and tone at the top, then develop an information risk program that aligns well with your company, and then identify how that fits into SOC 2, and you're going to find it's going to fit pretty darn well.
Yeah, another thing that I've been recognizing over the years, when I go into a new customer, help them on their journey, it's amazing how many controls they already do perform. So to feed into that point, when there's that tone at the top, that good security culture, they don't realize they're already doing some of these great controls that they really should take credit for to get the SOC 2, not only from the IT side, but also from an operational side. Mm-hmm. So on this slide here, some of the points too, where SOC 2 has the broadest level of assurance and is the most flexible framework. Nick, what does that mean to you?
Absolutely. So when we say broadest level of assurance, it speaks to two things we've already talked about. One is SOC 2 is a management framework. So it covers organizational, operational, and security practices. So it's covering really your entire business. The other piece is that SOC 2 has the ability to cover and address security practices, confidentiality, privacy, and processing integrity. And so we can really adapt the scope of the reporting to the needs of our clients and the needs of their customers. The flexibility piece speaks directly to the fact that this is not a control framework. So there are a handful of frameworks out there that say you need these specific controls and you need policies that contain the specific language in order to meet our framework. Well, like we mentioned, SOC 2 says, here's the criteria or objectives. The controls that you implement to meet those can be flexible to your organization, which is key to aligning compliance with operations.
Fantastic. Now here's the question everybody wants to know. How much should they budget for to go on this SOC 2 journey? What are the common costs? What's the range? I know we see pen tests around 12 to 15K, sometimes a little larger. There's going to be some costs that you don't realize roll in with bringing on new IT tools. Maybe it's a device management fancy tool, or some other tool that may be industry specific, maybe like if you're a HIPAA, in the HIPAA world, maybe a very secure kind of O365 box equivalent that's more HIPAA compliant. We've also seen consultants, me being one in my past life, charging around 20K to get companies ready, and it can be more. How about you, Nick? What are you seeing from the audit side?
Absolutely. No, those first few costs that you were talking about align directly with what we're seeing with our clients. I'll caveat my pricing discussion with there are what we call low cost or drive-by audit firms out there. You get what you pay for. And so the pricing that I'll discuss is really focused on more of a high quality auditor who is going to be partnering with clients to focus on the long-term value beyond just the compliance piece. And so what companies can anticipate seeing is if the auditor is involved from a readiness standpoint or that gap assessment standpoint, then 15K-ish as a baseline for the readiness or gap assessment. You could see it go up higher depending on scope, but that's kind of a floor we'll see. For the type 1 audit, 30K is typically the baseline. And then type 2 audit is going to be high 30s to 40K as a baseline. As scope changes, prices increase from there. But I think those are good from a minimum budget standpoint. And I think that the year 1 and annual figures we have on here to help explain the difference there is year 1, there's potentially 3 engagements going on there. We potentially have the readiness assessment, the mock audit, the type 1 audit, and the type 2 audit. So for our clients who need the type 2 SOC 2 within that first year to meet customer or prospective client demands, then they're going to be doing all 3 of those engagements in 1 year. It's going to be a hefty pull for that year 1. For ongoing costs, there's just going to be that one type 2 SOC 2 audit. And that's why that the 30 to 60K is much more reasonable ongoing expectation for the single audit.
Fantastic. And now that we budgeted for this, what can we expect to get out of a successful SOC 2 engagement?
From a value standpoint, kind of starting from what I think is lowest to highest, one is you get the report. But what do you do with that report? That's the key thing. And so one is it's going to introduce new growth opportunities. And so one thing that we'll always tell prospects is we recommend doing a SOC 2 in one of 3 scenarios. One scenario is you have prospective clients who are asking for it, so it's going to drive revenue potentially up for you. The other scenario is you have current clients or customers who are requesting that you get a SOC 2 to fulfill their requirements so that they'll stay on as customers. So you're going to retain revenue. And the third item is you're truly interested in developing maturing processes to fulfill SOC 2 down the line. Those are all just business decisions. If it's not going to help you make more money or improve the value of your business, there's no value in doing it. There's other options there. And so when we're looking at it, it's really the option 1 or step 1 of the value piece here in the business impact is going to be you get the report. 2 is hopefully that report leads to revenue growth, organizational growth. And 3, the biggest impact is you're driving value in your company and maturing your company. And that's going to be operationally. It's going to be reducing risks from the security standpoint, and it's going to be setting you up for longer term success as you grow.
Fantastic. That actually feeds right into our final thoughts on the new trends, that compliance as business revenue value. I think you hit that on the head. Getting that SOC 2 shows that you really mean business, that you're taking security seriously. Your customers can then trust you. It's definitely a driver. We did talk about remote workforce. So what's this rise of compliance operations?
Absolutely.
How do you see that fitting in?
There's 2 components to that. One component is more and more organizations are seeing compliance as a part of business. So they're understanding, oh, this is not a check off the box activity. There's not much value in that approach. we are going to be ingraining our compliance operations into our business operations. And so compliance is now really a role within organizations. If it's not a defined role as far as job title, it is an accepted role just within leadership in enforcing operations that way. The other piece of compliance operations, I like to call them compliance operations or comp ops platforms. StrikeGraph, for example, where there's now, it used to be that we had auditors and we had our clients, and we would use integral tools for transferring documents and organizing our audit. But there is a ton of inefficiencies inherently in the audit process. And so the introduction of compliance operation platforms like StrikeGraph help two things. One, it's the organization on our clients' end of maintaining those internal controls, continuously maintaining their audit evidence in a real-time basis in those platforms, and assigning responsibility for those controls and uploading the evidence on a real-time basis. The other piece is that streamlines the audit process. Our clients are ready to go, evidence is there, they have a full understanding of their internal control structure, and it's a win-win for everyone. It really changes the audit process from a once-a-year activity to an ongoing part of the operational activities.
Fantastic. So with that, we can open it up to questions from the group. See if we have any to start.
And happy to answer any, so please feel free.
Yeah, it's your opportunity to ask an auditor.
As we're waiting for those to come through, one thing that may be helpful for our attendees is there's often confusion around, holy cow, Nick, Michelle, you guys keep on mentioning controls. How do we know what our controls are? And as you mentioned, Michelle, oftentimes you're doing 80% of them without even realizing it. And so what we view our job as an auditor, if we're involved in the readiness stage, or what your role is, Michelle, from StrikeGraph or as a consultant's perspective, we listen. We understand your company, we listen to what you're doing, and we actually help draft the control page so that you're not trying to go through and do that yourself. So we're taking that off your plate. We're helping you understand how do our current controls fit into SOC 2? What are the gaps of new controls that we should implement that actually also support our operations? And that's why it's key to have a partner that really is holding your hand through the process so that you don't have to worry about the control mapping, the control development, et cetera.
Yeah, good point. From the StrikeGraph perspective, we've built our platform to have a library of common controls that we see. That's not to say that they're going to be a one-size-fit-all type of control, but they give hints and ideas. Oh, this is what we're looking for when we look at, say, the common criteria over logical access. So our customers can see, oh, here's what some other companies have put in place. Oh, that's a great control. We do that. Great. Let's take credit for it. Or, wow, that's a great control. We can evolve to that. We can get there. Or I don't see any control that relates to us, so we're going to type in our own control. Mm-hmm. So understanding the controls that's a great point. Can you also, what about mapping? What's this concept of mapping? Nick, do you want to share that with the group?
Yes, so this gets back to the concept that SOC 2 is a management framework. And so SOC 2 is made up of a series of criteria, or we looked at it really as goals. And so what mapping is it's understanding what are the controls that actually apply to each of those criteria to help meet those criteria. There's an objective and a subjective approach to mapping, and it's why we recommend that you get the auditors involved sooner than later. Objectively, the AICPA, our governing body and the governing body of SOC 2, provide what they call points of focus. They're areas where controls, depending on the size and complexity of the company, controls should somewhat align to meet those points of focus of the criteria. The reality is that auditors also use their professional judgment based on your company size, complexity, etc., to understand, based on the criteria, what do we feel is sufficient to meet those objectives. And so you want to work with an auditor to understand both the objective and subjective part, because to be honest, there are a handful of points of focus, which are recommendations for consideration, that we don't necessarily feel are required for especially a smaller organization, which may be required for some of our public clients. And so there's some give and take there in understanding. Yeah. Looks like there's a question that came through about how to choose the right vendors, how to choose the right auditors and the right pen testers. Really, how do we evaluate those partners? And lastly, where does user training fall into compliance? Michelle, what's with the clients that you help? What's the process that you help your clients through for choosing the right vendors and in selecting an auditor or a pen test?
Yeah, we can speak to the pen test and the auditor. For auditors, we like to remain auditor agnostic, meaning we don't point our customers to specific 1, 2, or 3 auditors. We allow our customers to really pick, but we also give them coaching and guidance on the questions to ask. And because we have a deep knowledge and we're usually brought in very early in the process, we've gotten to know our customer. So we can say, they'd be a great fit with Nick at Geels Norton, or maybe a different auditor. And so we like to present at least 2 or 3 different auditors so the customer can really make a decision that feels good for them. We may have a client that's going down the track really fast, 45-day sprint, and got to get that SOC 2 type 1 quickly. Some auditors may be more nimble or have more availability. So it's good to really ask around. As far as pen test, StrikeGraph, we do offer pen testing as part of our platform. And in the follow-up email after this presentation, you'll be able to look and be pointed over to the StrikeGraph site to see more information about that pen test.
Wonderful. Any other questions from the attendees? Would love to be a resource if we're able to.
And if questions don't come up now, and you think of something as you're going along, our contact information is on the deck, which you'll also get a copy of. So Nick's contact information is here, and you can reach StrikeGraph through my email here, Michelle@strikegraph.com. And well, if any more questions come up, we'll dive into them. But I wanted to first thank Nick so much for being part of this series. Fantastic to have you in, and fantastic to hear from an auditor. Sometimes auditing is quite a mystery. So it's nice to hear from your point of view what you audit, what you look for, how you can help clients, really that partnership approach. Really appreciate it.
No, Michelle, our pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. We'll stay on a little bit if more questions come up. Just in conclusion, if folks are interested in the demo I mentioned, you can get a demo of the StrikeGraph tool. It'll come in an email after this presentation. And then also, we have a couple of unique things we're going to offer all the participants kind of a cheat sheet or a roadmap on a 45-day sprint, just as an example of the different steps of an audit process. You can squeeze it into 45 days or you can squeeze it into 6 months. It's up to you. We also will send a link to how to get in on the pen test offer that we have for webinar participants. So with that, we'll hang out for a little bit, answer more questions. Otherwise, thanks folks for joining.
Thank you all.
see.